The 15th of December, 2022. I'm your host, Dana Durnford. My friends call me the Gamma Goat. And you can call in at 709-589-4406. 709-589-4406. Don't be shy on that. The world is not going to attack you if you call in, you know. The nuclear industry, what can I say? Sadistic demons, maybe? I got a call from Organic Slant. Asked me what's up with Unit 1. There's a bunch of holes in it. So that's the live cam. And the time, their time, was 7:55 a.m. this morning. And which is tomorrow morning their time. They're 12 and a half hours ahead of my time. And so when I zoomed in on this shitty webcam that they're using, I was in complete shock to see all kinds of holes in it. And you can see the sun needs to come up a bit more before you can get a clear shot of these shitty pictures. So, what are we looking at? This is a breaking story. There's around 36 of these holes. And the sun is not all the way up yet. It's in the background, and so it's facing the webcam that they're using, a digital webcam. So the footage is not an accident. They put it in that spot, by the way, and that they're using a cheap webcam. And we don't know if it's not a rerun from 5 years ago, for all we know. But I've never seen holes in it. This is new. And now there's no human going to actually physically do that. And they're not going to show you a human doing that. And they're not. And the proof of that is, here's the pictures, and nobody's else ever seen this before. And by cutting holes, just remember this is a 190-foot tall building. It's like 19 one-story houses on top of each other. And the reactor core would have been right around here when you're pointing into the building. Now, the fuel pool detonated from the meltdown of the reactor core, which was running. So the reactor core was running, it breached the containment and released a massive amount of hydrogen right away because of where it melted down, right? And then the zirconium cladding creates the hydrogen. So once you breach the hull, which are pressurized, now this is the fuel pool blowing up, not the reactor core. As far as I can tell. And now these pillars you're looking at, you can actually turn an SUV around on them. They're that big. So what looks like just framing is massive. It's designed to take a detonation. And the fuel pool would have been right behind that. That's what blew up. They had no power anywhere for 680 kilometers. And what was left melted down. And I got the video here. If you want to hang on a second, maybe I can find it, of reactor 1 blowing up. Maybe I do, maybe I don't. Just disappointing. I can find a picture. Just give me a second if I don't find the video. Let me see what this is. It's got audio. Yeah, I got it there. Hang on a second. Well, that's reactor 3 blowing up. That was pretty big bang. This must be reactor 1 then. Here we go.
Earlier this morning...
That's a man saying you shouldn't be sending women and kids back into the nuclear wasteland. You shouldn't find... That's reactor 1. Okay, I'll start right here. So this is reactor 1 blowing up. That's a serious explosion, right? I'm going to slow it down to 25%. So this, when it happens, is 25%. It should happen anytime at all. Anytime at all. So it turned everything into projectiles. Look at that. And you're seeing pieces blow up. Get a load of that. Wow. So watch these little puffs like you're seeing right there. There's a couple will show up right here. That was the fuel rods, the assemblies detonating. Right, so there it is. Now watch this again. Focus in on that spot. See the little puffs showing up out of nowhere? That's because it threw the assemblies from the fuel pools. Wow. Let's check over by that tower over there and see if I think I spotted some over there. So you're looking at the fuel coming out. So you got a big detonation. It's ejecting. And when you see these puffs exploding, and you see, wow. It's like fireworks, isn't it? Let me put you over on the other side. So I want you to look in here. You're going to see the same thing. These little puffs just explode. That's the fuel rods igniting. I didn't know they would do that. Get my big head out of the way. So right above my head that time. Towards the tower. See the little puffs? Those random little puffs showing up out of nowhere? Well, that's 32 kilometers away from the camera. So they're not little puffs. This building is 190 feet tall. So what remained was this building, but it didn't have these holes in it. They had put a sarcophagus, a Kevlar sarcophagus around it, was built off-site, brought in a framing, and then they used the cranes to drop panels, huge panels, 30, 40, 50 feet, panels 20 feet deep, and would self-hook there. And these were Kevlar. And the idea was to contain the building. That was spectacular. Wow. Now, there's multiple reactors melted down. That's the fuel pools detonating. But after the show, it's going to be daylight. It's going to be 10 and 11 o'clock a.m. So I'm going to jump back on. I can do that live, I guess, if I want to here in a minute. And what the hell is going on with those panels? Those holes, they're chopped out. There's around 35 of them. So, the wind's going to go in there, and it's going to be, how you feel like you had a fire pit in the woods, and you got little air pockets. And so there's incredible amount of radioactivity in like particulates and dust and atoms that are shedding particles. And so you're turning that into a toxic wasteland by chopping it open like that. This is what he had a Kevlar sarcophagus around it for 5 years, was to contain it, and now they're putting holes in it. And I guess the idea is so they can see inside of it with cameras or something, because you can't physically go there and chop those holes out. That's why And thank goodness, Organic Slant gave me a shout and said, "Hey, what the?" Well, he never swore, but he's. Have you ever seen anything like that? That's brand new. We've never seen that before. That's an important story. And then the reactor below it melted down, and it was 1 million sieverts outside of this building. Masterworks is supporting piece of shit, scumbag Masterworks, you scum, is sponsoring Alex something, Adam something. Too afraid to put his name there because he's such a degenerate. Nuclear power is fine, and here is why. Let's walk through some of it very quick. He starts off by showing you Homer Simpson. And so somebody, hopefully he accidentally sticks a pencil in his ear one of these days for doing Simpsons. Then he brings up Chernobyl and Fukushima. And he claims Chernobyl, of course, is the worst accident in human history. Which is absurd, right? There's 16,000 workers ran away, by the way, from Fukushima, homeless. There was all kinds of modeling, but studies showed up after Fukushima on America and Canada, these one from Canada, of 20 million particles of radioactive iodine-131 per liter falling symmetrically over North America. These are horrific numbers. This is horrific. Chernobyl was 600 miles away from the ocean. Another study, by the way, of 220 million atoms per liter falling out. That was from Ottawa, Canada. So you got 20 million in that study of iodine-131, 220 million of iodine-129. Incredible stuff. He rolls out Thunder Dick, sack of shit, a.k.a. terrorist, and says it's like getting on an airplane at Fukushima. So you get the same doses. Like, this is North America, 5,500 to 8,500 miles away. The whole country covered in it. And he's claiming Chernobyl, there's no mutated, two-headed. So, despicable people, the real example of a despicable human. One Chernobyl is equal to 100, or one Fukushima is equal to 100 Chernobyls. And Japan's seen a rise in cancer of 865,000 extra cancers in 2012 compared to any other year, a spike. Cancer is just one of 1,800 illnesses and diseases that would show up. Fukushima, they faked both reactors, reactor 3 over there, reactor 4, and pretended everything was okay. I mean, there's the stump of reactor 4 and the stump of reactor 3. The fuel pools would have been at the very top of the buildings. So a really dirtbag, this Alex something dirtbag. It's not Alex something, it's Alex dirtbag. The fuel pools would be at the top of the buildings. That's the remains of reactor 4. And he's pretending it looks like this. At this, with no building, where the fuel pool would be at the very top of the building, there's no top to the building. Terrible example of a human. He says Chernobyl's a wildlife reserve, and like the rest of them, they'll use beak animals, right? Are migratory and will cut through the zones. They don't show you any biodiversity or anything like that. So, again, he talks about the city that was built. The city that was built, he says he contacted Thunder Shithead, and he said it's like flying on a plane. Except for a plane, you get a whole body dose. Well, if you that's the shoe bomber there, and that's his twin brother over there, which is the same as this guy right there. I can't tell the difference. Can you tell the difference? So he talks about the mushrooms around Chernobyl, which is illegal to pick them because, like, every atom that's in your body, and he's trying to measure it in microsieverts and unisieverts. It's a complete con job is what he done. But I can cover one of these every week, right? But it's important that we call it certain scumbags. He's exceptional. Not only because he used thunder shithead, but because he's a scumbag. They used Simpsons. So, for instance, you talk about the mushrooms right alongside the reactor saying they're perfectly safe, so shut up, stop your fear-mongering. But after Chernobyl, they actually closed 9,400 farms. 400 are still closed today. In the United Kingdom, Ireland, and Scotland, almost 3,000 miles away. But the mushrooms right by it are okay, so stop your fear-mongering. Claiming you got to eat 250,000 to get a lethal dose. You sack of shit. First off, mushrooms are the worst product for aggregating radiation, or the most lethal for aggregating radiation. That's why it's banned. It's illegal to pick mushrooms because they gather up radiation more than surrounding areas. And a single mushroom, if you eat a single one of them, what happens is all the atoms, and there could be hundreds of thousands in a single mushroom, sequestering in your muscles, your organs, your bones, hundreds of thousands. And each one of them is going to be attacked with white blood cells for the rest of your life. And your white blood cells for the rest of your life is going to try to build a tumor around it. Because you got so much atoms in your body, eventually your body's producing more white blood cells than red blood cells. They call that leukemia, by the way. And there's up to 1,800 illnesses and diseases, you heartless, disgusting maggot that put out that video. Alex something. It's not Alex something, it's Alex the monster, the twisted, sadistic demon. Claiming Chernobyl, again, is the worst accident than Fukushima. And saying that Fukushima only had a earthquake and they had a wall around it and the reactors, all this nonsense, but it was meant to deceive you. They went through a lot of work to lie to you, is what I'm saying, and that the truth is widely available even on shitty sites like Wikipedia. So he blames it on, and he says this was a hydrogen explosion, not a nuclear meltdown at Unit 4. Here's the stump, actually, of the Unit 4 when he finished. The fuel pools would have been at the very top of the building. There is no top to the building. That's the stump of Reactor 4 over there. The fuel pools are at the top of the building, and the reactor core was half full, which is many times more, rather, than was at Chernobyl combined. Chernobyl didn't have fuel pools. This was 4 reactors, including this building, Reactor 4. It originally looked like that. A real dirtbag, the person that made that video, Alex something, or Alex the scumbag, nothing, is an incredible, despicable dirtbag. Then he claims that the earthquake and tsunami killed all the people, but for radiation deaths it was only one, so stop your fear-mongering. Like, really? I'd like to see you go down to Japan and tell that to the Japanese. And that would be the end of you pretty quick. Let me update you on the reality of this evilness that you are. Why don't you get a real job instead of being evil and making sure people are destroyed? There's no reason to be evil unless you're evil. And then you should be in jail for the rest of your life because you're obviously a terrible example of a human. In just one community, the death rates might give the creeps to some people. An extra 12,000 people died of heart attacks in a single month. And radiation is notorious for agitating and aggravating and sequestering in your heart muscles. But an absolute horrific example of a human. That's what that guy is. An absolute. Then he shows you nuclear power is safe, and he shows you nuclear power plants surrounded by farmland. The fuel pools from the reactor sites are still splitting the atoms. This is why the majority of plants are surrounded by farms. Shows you caricatures of children's heroes. Claims you need 50% nuclear. And has the arrogance, the hubris, and the pompous personality to say thanks for watching. And he just lied the entire 9 minutes. 9 minutes of being a monster. Our contaminated future. This is the story about Fukushima. And we're killing it tonight with 18 people. Yeah, work like a dog for your whole life, and you too could have 18 people on your shows. Like I said, I keep meaning to do a show where I wrap shit on a stick so we can get 30, 40,000 people to come by. And Fukushima communities are adapting to life in a time of permanent pollution. Well, then it should be permanently evacuated. He's got a Geiger counter, and he's going around with the Geiger counter, and he's finding numbers that are hotter than the official, in fact, really hot, like no-go zones. And his gamma computer is not looking for betas, alphas, neutrons, and X-rays, which it should be, right? And because this is bought by pro-nuclear corporations from pro-nuclear organizations, it's going to be a flawed Geiger counter, see? And so he's supposed to, when he sees the Geiger counter screaming, he's supposed to pack up and leave. Never come back. That would be a morsel of intelligence. That's lacking in Japan and anything to do with nuclear for some reason. So I got a professor writing, assistant professor writing a story, and from Canada, no less, from the pro-nuclear, and hasn't got the common sense to suggest that that's a terrible place to be. I say it's disappointing, but I'd be saying it all the time, wouldn't I? Everything is polluted. Well, get the fuck out of there, stupid. Air, water, land, plants, and living bodies are woven through it all with radioactive pollutants. Radioactive pollutants. Wait for it. The region remains contaminated. Industrial pollution. Then it switches to industrial pollution. Why would you do that for? These are dirty bombs. You don't call dirty bombs industrial pollution. Leave it up to a professor to fuck you over, huh? And my apologies. I get a little pissed off sometimes when people just sit there and murder other people with a pen. Through attempts at removing pollutants, not even industrial pollutants. Now it's just pollutants. They're not going on back to their to an uncontaminated way of life. No, they're not. Well, they're not supposed to be there. Industrial pollution again. In a toxic landscape. It's a nuclear wasteland. And there's a huge difference between man-made anthropogenic pollutants like radiation than it is from industrial pollutants. Because man-made anthropogenic radiation is 2 billion times more toxic than industrial pollution. 2 billion times. We're talking about saturation, and the reactors are still melting down. They're still hemorrhaging radiation into the environment. You're a very dishonest person to write something like this. You shouldn't be allowed to walk on the sidewalks with normal humans. I disrespect you for doing it that way. Have a nice day. On to the next scumbag. It never stops, eh? Oh yeah, this study. I'd done this about an hour ago. I was reading this and I was getting upset and I gotta get like a nuclear scientist doll so I can wring its neck when I'm working. Fucking a little. Get it out of my system before it go live. So this is a study, which is a stretch to call this a study. It's a study on how to make you completely incompetent. Time dependence of decontamination efficiency after fallout of gamma-emitting radionuclides. Again, they're going to talk about cesium-134 and 137. That's it. Nothing else exists, only gamma. There's no alphas, no betas, no neutrons, no X-rays as a result of all of them. Just gamma. And by doing that, you're not doing a study, you're doing a cover-up. There's a cover-up. There's a complete cover-up. And by only including one isotope out of 1,000 that you're supposed to be including or calculating, extrapolating, because once you got a number of one, you can do a lot of extrapolations. 1 and 1 don't make 2. It makes 1,000. Decontamination of urban areas may be necessary in cases. Decontamination of urban areas. It's really hard to believe somebody actually wrote this, an actual human wrote this, that could be that desensitized to the sufferings of others. Let me calm down. Decontamination of urban areas may be necessary in the case of extensive fallout, because they're talking about Japan. So using the word may be necessary, I got to do some slurping. Get mad all you want. Dana, that's wicked. You could have got your face off the camera at least. Yeah, but I forgot. When you're wallowing in this excrement all day, right, you feel really bad about life, that humans subhumans, I should say, like this exist. Get on with it, Dana. Let me do it on the big screen because otherwise I start. Let me take the headphones off so I can't hear myself yelling. There, that's a bit better. Decontamination of urban areas may be necessary in the case of extensive fallout of radioactive material after a nuclear event, as removal of contaminated soil and vegetation will significantly reduce the dose for the residents. Well, that sentence shouldn't exist. Removal of contaminated soil and vegetation, somebody has to get polluted and die to do that and bring the radiation home to their children through the washing machines, will significantly reduce doses for the residents. Significantly. By scraping topsoil is what they're talking about. They actually said this, by the way. I didn't Photoshop this. This is real. So instead of moving the citizens out of there, the humans, I should say, the children, out of the brutally radioactive zone, so bad you got to find homeless to clean it up because nuclear scientists won't go there. In an area affected by fallout, which was 3/4 of planet Earth severely, experience from Japan shows that cleanup operations of urban areas may take years, despite investments in ample resources. Well, 54 nuclear power plants in Japan closed down. None of those people went to work at Fukushima or cleaning up No nuclear scientists were there, no nuclear academics, no universities, no nuclear corporations, just the homeless and the destitute. And wingnuts doing articles about gamma, not including the serious stuff, all the serious other radioactive fallout emissions. Time integrated dose reduction, TDR, time integrated dose reduction, decreased gradually after fallout depending on the vertical migration rate of radiocisium. And to some extent, 134, delaying the topsoil removal from 1 to 10 years will result in a total time integrated dose reduction decrease by more than a factor of 2. Well, when you're only including 1 or 2 isotopes out of 1,000, there is no reduction. If you're not going to include uranium and curium and plutonium and americium and neptunium and strontium and all the other then you're a scumbag. You're a degenerate. You're trying to hoodwink. And your study's paid for by taxpayers' money on top of that. And so you're an incredible degenerate who's perpetrating fraud, obviously. Got the money to do the study to trick the population. That's called fraud. And removing the topsoil within 1 year after the fallout results typically in an averted effective dose between 34 to 80 millisieverts. You're breathing in physical atoms. But then I figured out what they were actually doing. They were talking about external doses. They're not talking about internal doses. They're not talking about airborne either. And so, the fire was starting to smother inside of me. I had to go get a cup of tea. I came back. And they were talking about, again, I read 34 to 80 millisieverts per million becquerels a square meter disposition of cesium for residents in wooden houses. You're going to love this. 80 millisieverts. The corresponding value for residents in brick houses, not wooden houses, but brick houses, are 50% lower due to high shielding. Do you get what they just done? I'll explain to you. So they're saying if you live in a brick house, you get 50% lower doses because your bricks are thicker and they shield you from the exterior radiation better. By the way, 50% shielding in a nuclear wasteland, 50% less dose, and living in it, day in, day out, breathing the air is absurdness. Everything there, including the house, is supposed to be dug up and taken to a nuclear waste site and kept there for thousands or hundreds of thousands of years. So to leave people in this environment, produce studies to quantify it, or to deceive the population, the victims, and staying in their harm's way, is the lowest, has to be one of the lowest forms of life, because you're doing it by volume, because you're trying to trick millions of people into staying into a bad environment with fraudulent studies. And the police are like, well, there's no law against poisoning you, which is true. And this is what, and your parliaments and your Congress doesn't have the authority to make it illegal to poison you with radiation, by the way. Only the non-regulatory agencies, like the Nuclear Regulatory Agency, has that ability. And there's zero possibility that they're going to be doing it. And they're appointed, not elected. Because if you elect somebody, then you get an honest person that gigs up for the nuclear industry. The corresponding value for residents in brick houses are 50% lower due to higher shielding. And the problem with this is it goes on. Additional modeling is needed to estimate how age and sex, children, females and children, and then young females will get 4 times more tumors than a male of the same ages. And it's catastrophic to the reproduction system of the female population. And so just hang on a second. I probably won't find it at this stage, but There's no harm in Dana trying, so give me a second. Don't be so pushy. Yeah, I'm never going to find that. My life is not that simple. I got to put the headphones on just to protect you from... I just wanted you... So the picture in the background is 40 times the speed that they released, which was 20 times the normal speed of their webcam. And you see this haze? This is radioactive plumes.
Fukushima plants say the ground under the facility is cracking and radioactive steam is escaping through the cracks. The cooling system at the plant failed after the devastating tsunami hit Japan in March, sparking a nuclear crisis. But new evidence suggests that Fukushima reactors were doomed to cripple even before the massive wave reached them. Joining me now via broadcast,
which was the earthquake caused the meltdown of reactor 1, we know for sure. It was melting down 50 minutes after. So this is a death plume where the ground is cracked in 6 places, and the steam coming out in certain conditions, the emissions, you can see them, right, are coming out of the ground and it'll look like steam, and the whole site disappears, is at 10 sieverts an hour, but that was what the Geiger counters maxed out at. These were stationary Geiger counters, so there were 6 different ones, and they all registered the highest number possible, and so the plume would have been thousands of sieverts. And when you see that, you have to run, like, you know, even if you're where the camera is too. The minute you see something like that, you need to run, steal a car, and just go as fast as you can to get out of there. Yeah, think about it. An accidental release. This wasn't a plume. This was constant, continuous plumes. And you can see long after, it was still hemorrhaging out in the form of invisible plumes. Or visible, in the right conditions, you can see it. And there's so much. My God, you know. Imagine being the homeless and the destitute on that poor site. And these arrogant crazies talking about cesium. Cesium's really bad, and there's a lot of it, but it's dishonest to do it because the biggest byproduct of radiated fuel rods is curium isotopes. And so they were only considering external radiation doses deposited on the ground in residential areas, and then measuring it in millisieverts and microsieverts is insidiously dishonest. That's not how you would measure the dose. You measure it in becquerels. Radionuclides can cause considerable external radiation dose to humans when deposited on the ground in residential areas. So they're talking about gamma, and they're not acknowledging any other gammas, just the cesium. And these plumes would have been very powerful in this area. And the time of short-lived gamma-emitting radionuclides are also released, which is like iodines 131, 132, 133s. But their damage is unbelievably significant because they're such brutal emitters, and they're so prolific. But curium isotopes, the biggest byproduct of radiated fuel rods, you need lead shielding 20 times thicker than you do for the active plutoniums. So external dose rates, I just really... They do look at some internal, but it's completely out of proportion to even what they're talking about. They claim that cesium will count for 75% of the time integrated external doses. First off, you can't have external dose only in a nuclear wasteland. The dose you're breathing in is by a factor of 1 billion. It's inside your body. It's pulsing energy almost at the speed of light. You're talking about vast numbers of actual physical atoms. physical atoms. So just bear with me. I got to give you an example, otherwise. The hard cases is all I can tell you. I just got to find one more for you. Hang on. Oh my goodness. We'll try again. I got it. I know it's a better spot. Sometimes. Here we go. Japan. Ah, to be stupid and naive and gullible. That would be the day. I miss those days. Like, it's hard to appreciate how batshit lunatic nuclear actually is. Yeah, it's so many examples, you can't keep up with it. Here we go. Okay, so 50,000 becquerels of cesium, a kilogram, means you got to multiply it by 64. So first off, 11 becquerels for children, you start to see heart problems. At 50 becquerels a kilogram in humans, adults, irreversible lesions in the vital organs, but irreversible heart problems and even heart surgery for children. And nuclear radiation is the most carcinogenic thing that exists. So 50,000 becquerels a kilogram, got to multiply it by 64 to get a square meter. And you had massive plumes of krypton for the mixed oxide fuel. So this is 2 billion times more toxic than industrial poison because it's already gone through a chain reaction once and it's reclaimed hot particles. Everything is a hot particle, same as any nuclear meltdown, certainly. 276,000 becquerels a kilogram or 18 million becquerels a square meter. 18 million becquerels a square meter. Japan is set up, which was Tokyo, by the way, and this headline, they're talking about moving the capital away from Tokyo. And Koto is really close to Tokyo. 230,000 becquerels per square meter of just cesium. And they had a xenon plume. Remember the krypton plume I just showed you. They also had a xenon plume of 400,000 becquerels times their so-called normal. So 50 becquerels a kilogram is catastrophic to adults. It's the most carcinogenic thing that exists. And 11 becquerels a kilogram is catastrophic for children. So what they're doing with these studies is to help TEPCO, basically. So when you talk about cesium, curium, and different types, isotopes of curium, and with a half-life of 162 days, then decays to plutonium, which has half-life of curium is 162 days. Half of it decays. It does that 10 times. It decays down to plutonium. And plutonium has an 87-year half-life, which 238. Yeah, 238. So it's got an 870-year life. This is just one of the many, like I just showed you, krypton and xenon. And so you got to look at the whole table of man-made anthropogenic nuclear, and then the daughters. Like up there, you can see the isotopes of plutonium. That's what these so-called daughters referrals, right? So there's if you're finding 238 plutonium, you're finding a lot of the 239 neptunium, 239 plutonium too, and 240 and 241 and 242 plutoniums. And then you're doing local research with an incentive not to be honest, like Osaka, which had huge, massive fallout. So it looks like I never got the headline of this story. It was about similarities and differences in health effects in people who have experienced disasters and pandemics. The headlines are below the video. After devastating Great Eastern Japan earthquake and Fukushima nuclear disaster power station accident, non-communicable diseases increased during that time. Non-commutable. In a 7-year follow-up, a previous study revealed the age. This is another story, by the way. I forgot the headline for some reason. I didn't screen capture it. The age-adjusted prevalence of diabetes. So I cover that, some of these headlines all the time over the years, right? Where 6 in 10 Fukushima children had diabetes in 2012, 2013. And Tokyo doctors says we're expecting diabetes in children from the Fukushima prefecture. But this is another story saying there's a lot of diabetes in both evacuees and non-evacuees significantly increased. Similar concerns regarding the COVID. So they're trying to blame a lot of the illnesses on COVID. Watch this. To stop the spread of infection, people were encouraged to stay home and work from home. Perhaps, as a result of that, increased body weight among the certain populations. Well, obesity doubled in just a couple of years in Japan. 8 years before coronavirus. A very naughty bunch, and they're trying to conflate it and equate it with COVID instead of what was actually radioactivity is known to do. Results of this study shows that the prevalence of all 4 diseases increased in Fukushima prefecture and the whole of Japan after the outbreak as well, which is the same diseases. The higher in females aged 40 to 74 years after the Fukushima disaster. The increase is prevalent rates of 4 diseases among males, 0 to 39. It's actually females have 4 times more tumors and 50 or 60% sooner than males of the same age from 0 up. Particularly preteens and teenagers. And obviously young children, right? But school-aged children was wicked. Dismantling Sellafield. Whoa, folks, holy shit. Everybody wants to get this and screen capture the whole thing and put it in a folder on your disk. There's, they missed a lot of stuff, obviously, right? And they made mistakes in some stuff, but woohoo! You wouldn't believe the stuff in this story. It's extraordinary. So Samantha, great job, Samantha. The scariest thing imaginable, because it's Sellafield, sack of shit Sellafield, surrounded by farms, and not just cow farms and sheep farms, which is unconscionable that they do that. Britain is every nuclear plant, and they had, I don't know what it was, 26 Magnox plants. Everything was surrounded by farms as far as you can see. Their fuel pools are hemorrhaging radiation, but Sellafield was a reprocessing facility where they brought fuel in from outside. Making safe what is left behind is an almost unimaginable, expensive, complex task that requires us to think not on a human time scale, but a planetary one. You have to actually, because you're burying waste in the earth, you got to think of tectonic plate movements hundreds of thousands of years down the road, continental splits and everything else. Requires us to think not on a human time scale, but a planetary one, which is 100% correct. Sellafield compels this kind of gaze into the abyss of deep time because it is a place where multiple time spans drifting in and out of view. Laid out over 6 square kilometers, it's a small town with nearly 1,000 radioactive buildings. Its own roads and railways owned by the government, requiring security clearance. At the end of a long road in Colombian coast, one moment you're passing cows, drowsing in pastures with the sea winking just beyond. Then having driven through a high security gate surrounded by towering chimneys. Pipework, chugging, cooling plants, everything dressed in steampunk. Deadly steampunk. In the 50s, it had a different duty. It manufactured plutonium for their idiot genocide routine. They took these weapons to Australia, and they waited for the winds to blow across Australia, and then they set them off. They also detonated over 700 dirty bombs. It's all legal. It's not illegal to poison you and murder you with radiation, thank goodness, or the nuclear industry couldn't exist. Then it generated electricity for the national grid. It carried out years of fuel reprocessing, extracting uranium plutonium from the nuclear fuel rods after they ended their life cycle. And the very day before I visited Sellafield in mid-July, the reprocessing came to an end as well. It was a historical occasion. Sellafield turned into a full-time storage disease factory and an uncanny, precarious one filled with toxic nuclear waste that has to be kept contained at any cost, which I wish they would do, right? That'd be awesome. Nothing is produced at Sellafield, only radioactive emissions. All the fuel pools are still splitting the atom into the environment. The full-time storage depot, spent fuel rods, they're hemorrhaging radiation. By the way, all the casts are vented too. The fuel pools, though, they're insidious, monstrous attacks upon the 8 million species in humanity. They're still splitting the atoms into the environment that they would for 1 million homes. So the more reactor cores you got in the pool, the more you're adding to it, the more emissions each day you're piling up into the environment because it never goes away. It's not bioaccumulation so much as it's an extinction level event. But then we had Fukushima and that broke the planet's back. Radioactive liquids, that's being pretty polite. Artificial ponds, no, these are special water goes into these ponds that are outdoors. And sealed buildings, which means you can never go near them again. In order to crack them open, you got to send plumes all over the planet. If you degrade too much, waste will seep out of them. Seep! Poisoning the Colombian soil and water. What do you think they're doing there for the last 70 years? You think they're not poisoning the water and the soil? It's a good story, don't get me wrong. I'm just saying it's unusual to see anybody even acknowledge this stuff. So fantastic. But because I cover this so much for so many years, sarcasm is pretty hard to shake. What am I looking for? Oh yeah, Sellafield. Hang on. Oh my God. There's all the pictures too. Hang on. Yes, Sellafield, man. It's really something. Nothing says evil quite like Sellafield, does it? Melted down in the 50s. 50. I think it was 59, was it? I can't remember anymore. There's still 8 million liters a day hemorrhaging into the Atlantic Ocean from the mixed oxide fuel facility that melted down. I got so much is the problem. Hang on. Plutonium in every child's teeth. That kind of tells the story. You can't do that without having it in every child's bones. And you can't do that without mutating their stem cells, by the way. I just need one picture to tell the story. There's another story that might interest you while we're looking at. That's not reassuring. Hang on. Let me do that one more time. I got a folder there of pictures for Sellafield. Come on, bring it on home to Dana. Or did I put that under wind scale? Now I gotta go check wind scale. Hang on. Oh, I think we hit her. Wow. Oh. Well, we'll give up on it, I guess. The problem is I've been at this for so long, and I'm a pack rat. I save everything. And so if I put in the word like wind and scale or anything like that, it's going to throw the friggin' a lot at me. And the Keistum anniversary is the same time too, right? If I remember correctly. Double anniversary. I can't win them all. Oh well. It's been a tough week because there's so much propaganda. Ooh, maybe we got something. Yep, that'll do. There are hard cases. Nothing says sack of shit quite like nuclear, I tell you what. There we go. Wind scale, besides the fact that every child has plutonium in their teeth and bones, and that the coastline is equal to Chernobyl and Fukushima's exclusion zone, it's surrounded by farms as far as you can see. Right up to the border. Evil doesn't describe how sadistic, and they even got a farm, look, all the way up inside of the plant, so to speak, is farmland. And then everything runs downhill. Every time it rains, you wash a stupid amount down into the ocean. But the plumes will cover the whole planet. It's responsible, and La Hague in France is responsible, which is one of the reprocessing facilities France has, and Donaray, of course, in Scotland, which is United Kingdom's reprocessing facility is closed, and it's going to be about 300 years to make it safe to run across the site or something. This is monstrous to be surrounded by farms. That's almost all nuclear plants have those attributes, are the same thing. So they can poison you. It's meant to display their absolute contempt for you. This is prime active farmland. So the cancer clusters in the communities close by, they blame that on the common flu and interracial relationships, especially for the children. It'll be 124 billion over the next 120 years. 97 billion applies to Sellafield alone. That's just 17 of the sites. They got all their magnoxes at the reactors closed, 26, 28 of them. They got Donaray, that'll never close. That'll be hemorrhaging radiation for at least 300 years before we come up with technology. Imagine how bad all the national laboratories like Los Alamos or in U.S. or on the other side of the coast in Washington, Hanford. They want 670 billion to finish cleaning up Hanford. They figured that's going to take 300, 400 years. And they're still producing it in overdrive. To prevent the disaster, waste must be hauled out, the silos destroyed, the ponds filled in with soil and paved over. So the ponds are these cement pools where they store the fuel that is still splitting the atom into the environment with no containment. Their solution is to fill it up with grout, not soil, and then pave over it. The salvage waste will be then transferred, because once you take it out of the buildings that are sealed, you're talking about huge plumes covering the entire planet. The salvage waste will be transferred to more secured buildings that will be erected on the site, which is temporary, because the Wigner breaks down, the gamma shines, X-rays, neutron burst, breaks down the integrity of any shelter. There's nothing they can do with it. But even that would only be a provisional arrangement lasting a few decades, because it gets broken down from the gamma shines and X-rays and neutrons. And we're talking serious pulsing, lethal doses anywhere in the building right away. Nuclear waste has no respect for human time span. The best way to neutralize this threat is to move it into a subterranean vault of the kind the UK plans to build later this century. First off, some of the people are former students of Geraldine Thomas, who's a war criminal, wanted for crimes against humanity. And the one that they're putting on a pedestal, is just as vile and lying as Geraldine Thomas is. And in her side hobby, she's also a professor, but in her side hobby, she radiates children who have cancer to make sure they don't have a future. Once interned, the waste will be left alone for tens of thousands of years. Well, that's not enough time. And it'll cost $121 billion. In your dreams, you'll do it that cheap. 80% of the money, the 90%, goes to administration. Only 10% goes into physical material. And because they got so much in administration, they hire all their friends and neighbors that they like, and you can never get rid of them. That's the definition of the atomic plague, is the employees, the inbreeding that goes on, and then it keeps expanding because up to 90% of it goes to administration. Compared to the longevity of nuclear waste, Sellafield has only been around for roughly the span of a single lunch break within a human life, which is incredibly honest, by the way. It's very rare. In 1954, sack of shit Louis Strauss, monster piece of shit, and also the chair of the disgusting U.S. Atomic Energy Commission, predicted nuclear energy would make electricity. You don't want me to say it, do you? You're not going to make me say that. Too cheap to meter. What a horrific, horrible... I can't say the word because it's really vile. They feed off it, see? That forecast has aged poorly. The main reason power companies, governments aren't keener on despicable disease factories known as nuclear power is not that activists are holding them back. Well, I'm certainly not. And you notice last night my video didn't show up for 12 hours. It didn't show up for the preamble. It showed up tonight for some reason. I complained to Google about it. And then you'll find links below my video where now I'm going to post it on Twitter and at my website and also my playlist and also as my home page every show from here on out. So they made me much more active by doing that to me last night. Thank you. We appreciate it. Very kind of you. Making me more work. I won't resent you for that, nuclear, I'm sure. Not that activists are holding them back or that uranium is difficult to find, but producing it safely is just proven too expensive. It's not your money. What do you care? You're going to steal it anyway, scum. The forecast has aged poorly. I said that already. Didn't get with the program here. I kept being told that Sellafield, as science is still trying to rectify the decision made in the undue haste 3/4 of a century ago. Many of the earliest structures, the head of operations went to Sellafield 2 waste storage ponds, weren't even built with decommissioning in mind. Like the breeder reactors and the Manju reactors and like a lot of the reactors, original reactors weren't built with any shielding, with no containment vessel. So when they cranked it up, the radiation was constantly emitted into the environment. It's evil on a whole different scale, folks. And it's incompetence too, right? The industry, because the inbreed, their current generation of nuclear industry barely form a sentence. They're the entitled lot, right? My mom worked in the nuclear industry. Their parents worked in the nuclear industry. And great-great-grandpappy worked in the nuclear industry. And their grandfather worked in the nuclear industry. And I'm entitled to everything. That's why we take 90% of all funding to do the work and use it for administration. Because we're not about an incredible, massive group of inbreed, incompetent, arrogant, pompous, hubris, entitled little pricks. They don't know how much time they'll need to. And whenever I hear the word nuclear waste and mop up, all the waste, mop up, that infuriates me. But it's usually people who really don't know the full significance of what nuclear is. Like if you use a mop for mopping up, so-called try to mop it up, you're going to spread it everywhere. And you're going to make it, high spots all over the place by doing that. Which is still better than what they're doing in Fukushima. With they're using pressure washers to clean houses, and they're saying, "Okay, it's decontaminated. You can move in with your little children, have a nice short life." It's lunatics. How long they have stored it? But she gets a lot right, and give her credit for it. It's very unusual for anybody to criticize the industry, so I shouldn't say jack shit. So I'm not attacking Samantha when I'm talking about this. I'm attacking the nuclear industry and throwing in the rest of the story that she probably wasn't aware of, or that the editors wouldn't let her write, or whatever the case may be. All the waste, or how long they have stored it, or what Sellafield will look like afterwards is just a guess. Assumptions and best guesses. And it will be finished a century or so, give or take a century from now. Well, you can never clean it all up. You can't get back everything, all the plumes released from it. He seemingly, because you concluded the entire Arctic and United Kingdom and a lot of Europe. He seemingly self-contradictory exercise dismantling Sellafield while keeping it from falling apart from the Wigner effect along the way. New technologies, for instance, new buildings to replace the intolerable ones, the radioactive nuclear wasteland ones, and new reserves of money, the 121 billion sterlings will swell further. All of Sellafield is in a holding pattern. Deep geological repositories bored hundreds of meters into the Earth's rocks, where the geothermal is right at your fingertips now. A project that could cost another 53 billion. And everybody in the United Kingdom can't even have a paycheck because they got to spend it on heating and fuel for their petrol, for their lorries. Even if a GDF receives a deep geological repository, receives its first deposit in the 2040s, it'll be the 22nd century before they actually got it filled up. And everything is vented. They got to repackage everything on top of that. Everything is vented into the environment. But that's the problem, is everything is still splitting the atom into the environment. And there's over 1,000 fuel pools worldwide hemorrhaging into the environment, invisible plumes all day long. And when I say invisible plumes, you're talking 120,000 liters boiled off each day, and each liter is trillions of isotopes. And you're talking 1,000 pools doing that every day. That's just one of the many, many, many emissions from these disease factories. And it never goes away. And it's pulsing energy almost at the speed of light. We call it climate change, of course, because you're adding to it every day. So there's more energy pulsing each day. It's been going on for 80 years. And you're talking plumes covering the entire planet consistently coming out of just the fuel pools. At one point when we were walking through the site, a member of the Sellafield team pointed out 3 different waste storage facilities within a 500-meter radius. The spot where we stood on the road, he said, is probably the most hazardous place in Europe. I have no doubts. Somewhere on the premise is Sellafield has also stored 140 tons of plutonium. Well, they had a lot evaporated out, right? Because you can produce it and turn it into a powder, but if you expose it to air, it turns into a vapor. It purified over decades. I don't know what would use that word. It weaponized it. It's the largest such hoard of plutonium in the world, but it too is kind of a waste. Not kind of a waste. It's gone through a chain reaction. It's lethal. Like, hang on. Why you gotta make me work so much? You run my ass into the ground. Oh yeah. By the way, the biggest byproduct of radiated fuel rod is curium. Curium isotopes are the major byproduct in the radiated nuclear fuel and comprise a significant fraction of the alpha-emitting radionuclide inventories. You need lead shielding 20 times thicker than you do for plutonium. And I'll show you how bad plutonium is. And this study was done on dogs. So a plutonium study on 144 beagle dogs at 238 plutonium. Tumors of the lungs, skeleton, and liver occurred beginning 3 years after exposure. Multiple tumors. Bone tumors found in 93 dogs were the most common cause of death. You know, like dead. Lung tumors found in 46 dogs were the second most common cause of death. And liver tumors were found in 20 dogs were the cause of death in only 2 and occurred later than the tumors in the bones and the lungs. Tumors in these 3 organs often occurred in the same animal and were competing causes of death. So when you talk about, or knows what else to do with it, more dangerous still are the 20 tons of melted fuel inside the reactor, the mixed oxide fuel reactor that caught fire in 1957 and been sealed off and left alone ever since. Well, that's not 100% true. They're pouring tons of water on that constantly. There's 8 million liters minimum a day that they emit to, hemorrhaging into the Atlantic Ocean. And so it's bringing the full range. And by the way, they don't have any ALPS system there for some reason, do they? Because ALPS was meant to make you incompetent. And the last one on this story. Spent fuel rods and radioactive pieces of metal rest in skips, which in turn are submerged in open rectangular ponds. These are not ponds. These are pools to stop the radiation from killing people when they're walking by using water as a separate barrier. To stop the neutron bombardment, X-rays, and gamma shines from killing people on the plant site. Which it still hemorrhages, boils off around 120 tons a day. And everything is saturated with isotopes. Where water cools them and absorbs their radiation. It absorbs the isotopes, it boils it off, and then releases the isotopes into all those farms that surround these disease factories. The skips have held radioactive material for so long that they themselves count as waste. The pond beds are layered with nuclear sludge, degraded metal wisps, radioactive dust, and discharged cladding, peeled off fuel rods like banana skins. Fills a cluster of 16-meter deep concrete silos partially sunk into the earth to shield you from the neutron burst. And that's only half the story. So it's worth reading the whole story. This is where I left off. Well, this one was about 20 minutes before I went live. I stopped there and ran into the studio and I said, I'm telling that story tonight. And like the Reactor 1, man, that's a big story. By Sunday, we'll do another show on it, which is why I got censored so hard tonight, right? It's because that's a big story. That's a breaking story, Reactor 1 we started the show off with. It's frightening. Yeah, it's a frightening story. We got a poll tonight, believe it or not. I forgot about it. Should countries have referendums before importing Japan's radioactive nuclear death food? Maybe that's why we got censored so hard tonight. They actually stopped my video from showing up last night. Went out and checked other sites, took screen captures of live streams. They were in people's list. And when the stream was over, it showed up right away on their site. Mine took 12 hours to show up. And the preamble didn't show up at all. Now, tonight the preamble showed up. So hopefully after the show is over, it'll show up. If you made it this far, it doesn't matter. But from now on, the home page will have the most recent video that I done. Just click on home, and the video that's going to play will be the most recent. And then I'll have a playlist. At the top of the playlist each day, I do a show. The most recent show or upcoming show will show up right there. So when I do a preamble, it'll go in those places also. It'll be at my Twitter, and there's links to all this in the bottom. And also at my website, I created a special page where the top video each day is the latest show or the current one coming up. And by that proxy, then the last video would be underneath it. And I appreciate the nuclear industry for screwing me over, so I do all that extra hard work. And I'm not going to be looking for payback for fucking me over nuclear at all. Your view on South Australia nuclear power and more. Your view on South Australia nuclear power and more. This was a Prime Minister who quickly slapped down any talk of a domestic nuclear industry. Slapped down. Hey, Prime Minister, we should have a nuclear... I like it. I can picture it in my eyes. Nuclear industry doesn't need the Labour Party or anybody else to shut down debate on nuclear energy generation. The nuclear industry doesn't need the Labour Party or anybody else to shut down debate. The nuclear industry never had a debate in their friggin' life on nuclear. Or otherwise I would have been involved in hundreds of them, right? Well, it's true. I have been in debates, but I've taken a lot of calls of people that were going to build condominiums and places like this, and they want to know how bad the radioactive fallout was in those areas, for instance. And I dissuade them from doing it in California. The industry's own inability to determine any means whatsoever to deal with the decommissioning of existing nuclear facilities and waste materials, despite 70 years and trillions invested in research, is more than enough to end the discussion. The industry's own inability to determine any means whatsoever to deal with the decommissioning of existing nuclear facilities and the waste material. After 70 years and trillions of dollars, they still can't figure anything out. Well, that means they're so incompetent, we should get rid of them all. Throw them off a cliff and put a wood chipper down there to see how they work. The only serious attempt at a permanent solution is the waste isolation pilot plant. Well, it wasn't called a waste isolation pilot plant. Look up the word pilot sometime, by the way. It was called a waste isolation pilot project. It was meant to see how the gas would last in a salt environment with moisture. Now we got the Canadian Nuclear Waste Management Organization claiming if you put 100 of an inch of copper on the coating, it'll never break down, not even a million years, Dana. And that's the lowest form of life, people who say that. Because when you put a high level of waste in a cast, it doesn't matter what you're using. The gamma shines, the X-rays, the neutrons, the Wigner effect is going to wreck it 30 years most. 40 years, and if you have any kind of earthquakes in these areas, it will split them right open. So you're going to take 100 years to fill up a repository. You better hope there's no earthquakes in that 100 years. The only, it's like the industry's scum. That's the only way to describe the industry. The industry's full of incredible degenerates. And there's a few people that are compartmentalized, don't know any better, but the majority of them are degenerate scum. The only serious attempt as because you can't get a job unless you are, see? You might not admit that you're a degenerate scum and you work in the industry. You didn't get the job because you had a moral high compass. You got the job because the interviewee said, well, underneath that's a very shallow, degenerate scumbag, and they're perfect for this job. The waste isolation pilot project, an enormous hole in the ground that caught fire and blew up. And we covered it in Albuquerque KRQE or something. Clipped out my video of me being honest and played it on TV and called me a conspiracy theorist. It's really Freudian stuff, folks, because I was telling the truth. I was 100% accurate, too. Which is 2014 you're talking about, right? The only serious attempt at a permanent solution to waste isolation pilot plant, enormous hole in the ground in New Mexico, has failed spectacularly. Yeah, they had a truck fire. They had a nuclear meltdown in one of the panels, and they got 55 football field-sized panels, which are like caverns. So they claimed they had a truck fire, so they evacuated it for 10 days because, and they showed pictures of what it allegedly was, and it was a salt truck. They're really short because they're underground, and one of the front wheels had caught fire. That's all it was. A set of tires caught fire, and they evacuated 55 football field-sized caverns for 10 days. And so when they went to go back to the site and go back to work after 10 days because of a truck fire, with the massive ventilation, like the ventilation machine they used there has its own warehouse basically, which is so radioactive they debated for several years whether to turn it back on. It's so expensive they said, well, there's only slaves down there to turn it back on. And so they even come out and assaulted us by saying they put kitty litter on it, and that's why it caught fire. First off, the panel was supposed to be full of just radioactive tools and gloves and hammers. How did they spontaneously combust, I wonder? And every existing seasoned nuclear power facility in the world is a Fukushima in the waiting. Full to the gunnels with spent radioactive waste, which is very, very high level, lethal doses by the pound for 1 million years. In other words, you took a pound of this stuff and you put it at a subway or airport or McDonald's or whatever. Every 20 minutes, everybody who passed it would die. You can do it for 1 million years. Full to the gunnels with spent radioactive waste needs to be kept cool for decades and no viable solution in sight. The best information available today from the nuclear degenerate industry itself is decommissioning a nuclear reactor at the end of the life is likely to take more than a century. Will those costs factored into the price of nuclear energy? No. Anyone promoting nuclear energy where there's a viable alternative is frankly bonkers. John Martinsson. Way to go, John. Good burn, buddy. When considering implementing nuclear power industry, it's worth considering all of the impediments outside the obvious political ones. He said, Australia doesn't have the experience, the sufficient skilled workers to run a nuclear industry. If nuclear does become popular across the world, the skilled workers in the industry will be short supply and expensive, if not impossible, to recruit and train, which is 100% right. Of course, we covered all this over the years, but it's nice to get it in a letter like that, right? This is just a random people writing into the media. The latest version of the Cicero Important Generated Cost Report ranks nuclear as the most expensive of existing technologies. The best one is geothermal. Why would you look at anything else? And at least double up to 5 times the cost of wind and solar, including storage and transmission. Well, you don't need storage or transmission if you use geothermal. You just got to have the will to deep enough, and you're set up for 1,000,000 years. The facility, you can have it up and running in 12 months or less to anywhere on the planet. There are dangers associated with nuclear that doesn't apply to renewables. And renewables, apart from being cheaper, get increasingly so than nuclear, are much quicker operationally to implement, and the lag in implementing nuclear power is no solution to the global warming crisis, which is caused by radioactive fallout pulsing energy every second for 80 years. All the nuclear testing, that was the same as the nuclear war, the same bombs. And if you look at the Soviet, the biggest one that they emit to was equal to 3,800 Nagasaki plutonium bombs going off at the one time. All of those elements are still in the environment. Your Geiger counter can't measure it, that's all. Ironically, the UK had announced a new coal mine very near Sellafield nuclear disease factory, the site of one of the world's largest nuclear accidents. That's being pretty polite. It currently in the process of decommissioning something that has been happening since 2009. Well, for some parts of the site, I guess. The current estimate of the decommissioning costs are now estimated at 117 billion, with an increase of 25 billion in 2009. So the new numbers are infinitely scarier than that on top of it. It does say nuclear is not a simple solution. A very high bar needs to be in place for its implementation. In Australia, if its supporters want to recycle the old arguments, if anything, the technology is now more in favor of renewables than nuclear. John Hewson. It's a great story. What a load of capitalist bullshit. The Premier is correct when he says the cost of building a disease factory known as a reactor for the population is uneconomical for the population. And in countries where nuclear energy has been built, there are many cities, each with a population greater than the whole of Australia, and for them it may be viable. But in Australia, with the abundance of renewable energies, renewables are the best option. Geothermal and tidal energy, if you got to. Back it up with wind and solar and storage, like compressed air storage or something like that. But there's 20 different solutions for storage that are wickedly inspirational. And here in Australia, with the abundance of renewable energy, renewables are the best option to pursue. I believe capitalists have anything from which no money can be made, hate anything from which no money can be made, and sunshine or wind cannot be taxed. Well, don't forget what the United Kingdom done to Australia with nuclear. And you'll end on the right path. Australia was the victim. Everybody in Australia was victimized by the United Kingdom nuclear industry. It went down there purposely, waited for the wind to blow across the continent, and then set off multiple nuclear bombs, plutonium bombs. And that they had over 700 dirty bombs, where they took plutonium, fission products, and uranium, and stuff like that, fission, and wrapped it in conventional explosives and set it off. And the testimonies from the people that were there and the academics who went and measured the radioactive fallout after and the distance that it spread and everything else was wild. Nuclear power is just a slow and expensive distraction. People are killing it today. How often do we get a day of stories, fresh stories, where everybody comes out and pummels the nuclear industry? I don't think we've ever had a day like we had tonight. I think this is the only broadcast where, and they didn't know all the nuances, which you don't really expect anybody to know anyway, right? Because you got to be some kind of freak like me or you that are here all the time to know all these little nuances. And I'm not freak in a bad way, but a freak of information, like a repository of facts. And that's what everybody that participates and watches these programs, you're the smartest person in your community, bar nobody. If you watch, particularly the ones that watch 50, 60, 100, or 200, you're hardcores, the hardcores. And ain't nobody fooling you folks. I can guarantee you that. There's zero going to fool you folks in the nuclear industry. Despite recent breakthroughs in nuclear fusion, these are not breakthroughs. Renewable remains the most important technology for reaching net zero. So I'm always shocked when I hear people buy into the net zero. The Sizewell B nuclear disease factory in Suffolk's fission fuel is back, or so say the UK political teams and press. The British and French government can sign any deal they like if key financial investors don't take up the remaining 60% of the construction. The planned Sizewell C is going nowhere, and they're 100% right. And they're trying every trick in the book, right, to raise the money, because they're not going to invest in it. Even though the ratepayers have already paid for it to be replaced, they just stole the money. Nigel Wilson, the group CEO of Legal & General, one of the UK's largest real asset firms, told BBC Radio, "We are not big fans of Sizewell C." And David King, the UK former's chief scientific advisor, long-standing nuclear supporter, told LBC that the plant would be very difficult to protect from flooding due to rising sea levels on that coastline. The financial advisory firm Lazards say utility-scale solar onshore wind power can be developed at about a quarter of the cost. Perhaps the Prime Minister should take the Treasury's concerns about the cost of nuclear energy more seriously. That's a pretty big dig from someone like that, a big organization like that. Then there's the saga of the European pressurized reactors being built by the energy company EDF, which is a farce to call them an energy company, which is vastly delayed and over budget. It's not vastly, it's criminally. Don't let the EDF tell you things are going to plan at Hinkley Point. In Somerset, as the company has secured a new contingency option in its contract to ensure funding continues, even if the reactors have not started generating power by 2036. And you can dream on. This means Sizewell C is not expected to generate power until up to 2040, far too late for our energy and climate crisis. The solution to the climate crisis, you got to get all the fuel pools contained. Until you do that, you're not going to contain the so-called global warming, which is global cooking by the nuclear industry, right? And the EDF is in trouble financially with 43 billions in debt, its accounts say, and faces further billions in loss this year. Oh yeah, this year is still far from over, with exponential radioactive waste and decommissioning costs on the horizon. Because they built all the reactors at the same time. And so they're all going to break down and die at the same time. That's what we're seeing. Macron is having a fully nationalized EDF, the Alien company, which has an estimated $50 billion bill for its mandatory reactor safety upgrades. And it's almost bankrupt because it blew all its money. And Renewables supplies 40% of UK energy in 2021 and a quarter of US electricity during the first half of 2022. And utility-scale renewables can be built relatively cheaply, on time, and to budget. Oh, booyah. Now, UCL said that the current favourable UK government policy toward nuclear is becoming increasingly difficult to justify. As for the idea that renewables are too variable to handle it, the international consultancy McKinsey said that renewables are poised to become the backbone of the world's power supply. And the reality of it is, it's entirely possible to sustain a reliable electricity system using renewable. Renewable can account for 95% of electricity. And so if you use storage, which has been suppressed, or geothermal, which doesn't need storage, it's game over. Between 2020 and 2026, there's 4,800 gigawatts of renewables coming online. That's equal to all gas, oil, coal, and nuclear plants combined worldwide. But what it really means in that 6-year period is that the prices, again, are going to drop dramatically, and they already are dirt cheap, and they're going to get more proficient. But by 2026, that trend doesn't stop at 2026 because you're bringing on the manpower to keep up with the demand. And so that workforce is not going to go away because you were able to produce the same as all current electricity on the planet through renewables in the next 4 years. Well, the next 3 years now, isn't it? Well, last year was equal to 330 nuclear power plants, 290 gigawatts, 330 nuclear power plants, animosity equivalent to renewable energy. That's, you can't build 330 nuclear power plants. That's almost equal to that's 3/4 of the plant on the planet. So, but in 2 years, we built over 550, 2020, 2021. Was 550, the animosity equivalent of nuclear power plants and renewables. But that's going to go bananas over the next couple of years. So what I'm trying to say is 2027, 2028, 2029, you're going to build just as much again in that 3 years. So instead of taking 6 years, it's only going to take 3 years. And then instead of taking 3 years, the next time for, and 4,800 gigawatts of renewables is equal to 5,500 large nuclear power plants. So renewables, and we're not talking about storage. And there's tons and tons there's over 20 great options for storage. But geothermal is the best one because you don't even need storage. But because you got so much renewables, you're going to have to use storage because you don't want to get rid of it. And you don't want the industry doing their song and dance, the wind don't blow and the sun don't shine. And if you put them on windmills on the mountains where the wind blows all the time, like some countries are starting to do, problem solved now, isn't it? Because the wind blows all the time. Putting it out on the ocean where there's doldrums in certain times of the year, that's on purpose to screw over the industry. This winter, with millions struggling due to cost of living and energy crisis caused by inflation from embargoes against the only country where they get their commodities from, self-inflicted inflation, thanks to the United Nations coercing 195 countries to do the stupidest thing, stuffing vast sums of public money into the deep pockets of France's stupid EDF won't look good or come up with solutions because France has proven they're incompetent already. Ask Finland. The actions that will power the UK's net zero energy transition are renewable expansions in all sectors, energy efficiency management, and rapidly advancing storage. Well, like compressed air storage where you pump air into caverns underground, drill out holes, and compress them. That's the best storage imaginable because but there's other storage, like heating rocks. They'll hold 3,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures for months at a time underground, or even above ground. But pumped air storage is the best one because the technology is so advanced now. Instead of 120 psi, you can put thousands. The weight of the evidence shows that due to the pace, scale, economics of the renewable evolution, all nuclear can do is make promises it can't keep. Despite all the nuclear sound and fury, fission fuel will turn out to be just an expensive distraction. And you know what? They're right. They're 100% right. So that was really unusual. We just done a whole show on recent news in the last 48 hours, basically, of different medias trying to cut the throat of the nuclear industry. Where the hell did that come from? I honestly never thought I would see a day when that would happen, when I would do a whole show disparaging, which I do anyway, right? But somebody else, for a change, disparaging the nuclear industry. It's probably one of my finest hours, is telling that story tonight and watching everybody getting pummeled in the nuclear industry, and all I'm doing is reading the story. Yeah, I threw in a few, snide remarks that kind of slipped out there. What do you expect when you hate the industry as much as I do? pretty hard to imagine there's anybody on this planet that hates the nuclear industry more than I do. I know there's a few out there, I'm sure of it. In my comment section too, probably. But I got a real hate on for this industry. And it'll never be quenched. Should countries have referendums before importing Japanese disease factory radioactive nuclear death food? It is death food, right? And there's up to 1,800 illnesses and diseases. So we got 37 votes, which is a shocking low number. Got 100% yes because the industry hates the truth. And because there's so this was a week of complicated stories too, right? It's an unusual week of the stories. And so I thought that was a great poll tonight. I got more stories there. I'm not going to cover them because this is the first time we ever done a whole show where other people beat the shit out of the nuclear industry. And I'm not going to spoil it with another story. Take a chance. Every story we've done tonight from the last 2 days kicked the shit out of the nuclear industry. I'm quite proud of the planet today. So I'm going to do a shout out for everybody tonight. I know nobody wants to hear that, but I got to do it once in a while. When my shows are not too long, I can do it. I gotta get rid of drums first. It's pretty sad how evil the nuclear industry actually is. I do a shout out for everybody. Vast Thinker. Hi, Vast Thinker. Blue Jay Outpost. Organic Slant, who gave me the tip today to go check out that webcam. Holy shit. That was amazing. Albert. Hi, Albert. James Lucid. Hi, buddy. NJ Prepper. I know Colette is out there somewhere. Haven't seen Swanee D in a couple of weeks. Diane Sunshine Wolf. Good night, everybody. Have a great day tomorrow. Have a great weekend. Ain't Jester. Timothy. Hi, Tim. Richard. Let's see. My eyes is a little blurry tonight with all the media beating the shit out of nuclear. My brain is like, what the frig just happened? And then I had a couple of stories just before I went live tonight, and I was like, what? They're beating the shit out of nuclear? I'm telling that story tonight. And the interesting thing about this was, outside of the first couple of stories, the rest of them were lined up on their own. I didn't move them around because I grabbed those few extra stories. Normally I shift the stories around a bit. So that worked out amazing. The whole show taking a shit on nuclear from different medias. Another Gmail. Stephen Young. Hi, Stephen. And I'll come down to the most recent comment here in a second. If you made it this far, don't forget to give us a thumbs up. How am I feeling this evening? Tinker wants to know. I'm feeling pretty good. I kind of went easy today for a change. And hopefully by the weekend, then I'll... Well, like my shoulder is still screwed up in my left elbow. Left shoulder, left elbow. Little left wrist is a bit fragile, but I'm not using the arm very much, right? And I'm really being cautious and doing everything with my right hand, so it's starting to heal up. It's just really hard to sleep with. For some reason, I always got to have a pillow underneath it. No matter which way I turn my body, I got to position the arm. And when I wake up, the arm is no fun. Yes, fusion. All the propaganda this week of fusion was really something else. And had no meat to it, right? And that's also, now that you mention it, small modular reactors is used the same way. What have I got done there? Can't touch nothing. Can't touch nothing on this equipment, man. Trying to walk a 400-pound dog down the road trying to work with this equipment. Okay, well, we'll see everybody. See everybody hopefully on Sunday. Hopefully they don't have any breaking news the weekend. I'm kind of expecting another earthquake down there, and I don't know why. If you make it this far, don't forget to give us a thumbs up. Or whatever works for you best. Hugs for everybody. We'll see everybody on Sunday. Have a great night and a great weekend. We'll see everybody in a few days.